Assalamu alaikum. And hello, everyone. I'm your host, Hena Zuberi. And welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now on Muslim Network TV. You can watch us on Galaxy 19, Roku TV, Amazon Fire, and soon on Apple TV. Discrimination and irrational fear of Muslims and Islam is still on the rise across the nation, even amongst COVID 19, as well as the nation going through a deep crisis over police violence. So, according to a report published by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, negative public opinion has increased over the last 2 years. Nationally, Muslims only account for, officially, for 1% of the population, yet Islam is also the fastest growing religion in the United States. Recently, we saw a small town in Tennessee be the center of extreme Islamophobia. An ad was published in the Tennessean newspaper, a local newspaper in Nashville, Tennessee, that suggested that Muslims are prepared to use nuclear weapons against the United States, potentially inciting more hatred and fear towards the American Muslim population. The Tennessean is run by editor Maria De Verenne, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and is the principal daily newspaper in Nashville, Tennessee. Joining us today, so there was a response, obviously, on social media, nationally, national organizations got involved, but we wanted to hear the voice of local Muslim community members from Tennessee, from Nashville especially, and especially the leadership from that area, because they know their community like no one else does. So joining us today to discuss the recent incident and the aftermath, and some positive, some negative, is Sabina Muhyiddin. She's the former director of the local, Sabina Muhyiddin is a Bangladeshi American Muslimah born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. She graduated from the Vanderbilt University in 1993 with a degree in mechanical engineering. So in 2010, Sabina helped launch the Daughters and Sons and Daughters of Abraham Project, which brings Muslims, Christians, and Jewish youth across Middle Tennessee together for interfaith dialogue and outreach programs. She's also a founding board member and currently the executive director of the American Muslim Advisory Council, which empowers the Muslim community in Tennessee through civic engagement, community building, and improved media relations. So thank you so much, Sabina, for being here.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. So let's tell us more about Nashville, Tennessee. How big is it? How big is the Muslim population there? How many masajid do you guys have?
So the Middle Tennessee area has about 1 million residents, and in Nashville is the second largest city in Tennessee and the capital. And in the Middle Tennessee area, we have about 40,000 Muslims, and so our largest community in Nashville is the Kurdish community, comprising about 15 to 20,000 strong, and then we have a large population from the Somali community, and then you have all from around the world, and then we have African American communities. So in this area, we have 11 mosques just in Middle Tennessee, but so we're a vibrant community in the middle of the Bible Belt.
And so what does that mean to be a vibrant community in the middle of the Bible Belt? What does that look like? How active is the community?
So the American Muslim Advisory Council, we're a statewide organization. So we work across the state, but obviously in the larger cities, they're usually more progressive, usually, in terms of Islamophobia, it's a bit less than if you go into rural Tennessee. And for myself, I used to live in Tullahoma, Tennessee, a little town, say over 95% white, very conservative Christian community. And so, what you see in rural Tennessee will be vastly different than what you see in Nashville. But those elements of, those who try to marginalize our community and do the fear mongering, they're everywhere.
So I wanted to ask you, how many incidents of anti-Muslim bigotry has taken place in that area in the recent years?
In the recent years, I mean, so you really have to think about in terms of bullying in school and threats to our mosque. We've had some threats to some of our mosques. Bullying in school is something you always hear. I don't, it's always present. And as you know, especially with the 2016 election, there was a lot of fear in the community. And, our kids, unfortunately, they're almost like on the front lines in terms of when something bad is going on in the community, they feel it first. We hear cases of discrimination all the time, and companies that tolerate it, and so these things are always alive and present.
When this happened, when the ad came out, was this something that you would have expected in the newspaper? Tell us more about the newspaper and what actually, for our audience, the ad came out. It was a full page ad in the local newspaper, and extremely inflammatory, criminal. I would call it criminal. The accusations, and it was by a nonprofit, I believe, or a faith-based organization that had placed it. Faith-based organization. So tell us more about. Had you seen it? What was your reaction? Did you see it online first, or did you open up the newspaper and see it?
Well, nowadays we don't get paper copies of the newspaper. So, actually I woke up and it was already being posted online. And so that's where I first saw it. It was a feeling of shock. It was a shock. Now, the details of what was in the ad, it was literally, saying that July 18th, Islam is going to detonate a nuclear bomb in Nashville. So it was very specific to Nashville. And so I was shocked to see it in the Tennessean. So over the years, I would say in 2010, there was an article in the Tennessean, and it was called "Is Islam a Threat?" And the whole premise of the article was problematic. And we, as community leaders, Muslim community leaders, we reacted right away. We organized. We talked to the newspaper editors and said, how could you print this? And we explained on so many levels what was wrong with it. And from that point, we started to build a better relationship with them. And so over the years, publishing different editorials and then articles, and being able to have that relationship when something's going on in our community, to be able to amplify it, and not have the media always be reactionary. So if it's something happened overseas, then they're like, oh, what is a Muslim community reaction? But really, what are our roots in the community, and how are we part of this community? And so we have really good relationships with a number of editors and reporters. And so seeing this in the Tennessean was a shock. It was just literally a shock. And for me, having lived in rural Tennessee, groups like this, these end of time groups with all these absurd prophecies that are going to happen, this is not something new. Like in my small town I lived in, you would see once in a while ads in the newspaper that a church was bringing this group in to talk about end of times. So what was being said wasn't so shocking to me because I know it's out there, but the fact that a reputable newspaper in the second largest city in Tennessee would print it was shocking. Now, we reached out to the editors and reporters, and of course, they were apologetic. They were shocked themselves. They didn't know that the ad ran. And
So can you explain that? So the editorial department is totally separate, and it hasn't the Tennessean been bought out by a larger by the USA Today from?
Yes, and that is true. The editorial department is separate from the marketing and from the advertising department. But regardless, the final product is on their shoulders. And they took responsibility for it. But the problem is the damage cannot be undone. And so how can you go back from that? Because even though they pulled the ad from the online edition, people had the paper edition at home. And so you never know, who is out there who reads it and says, well, this just, verifies all the ideas I had about Muslims and Islam.
And it had the Pope's picture on it.
Yes.
Right? And it looks like it doesn't even look like an ad. It looks like an article, the way it's laid out.
Right.
It could have been an editorial from the paper and unless you're really paying attention.
And I made the point that, I can write an editorial, put it as an ad and pay money and have it printed by a newspaper. I mean, this is what was being done, right? And so what are their protocols for getting an ad published? So, is this that anyone can do, put something like that? And this ad came out on Sunday, and a few days before, the same group had another ad which looks similar, but the writings was a little different, but it was kind of a build up to Sunday's ad. So it didn't talk about Islam or Muslims directly, but I think it should have been caught at that moment that this is a problematic ad. And I think that's where, and we, demanded the Tennessean that you need better education, cultural competency, but education about Islamophobia. So you can see and recognize, that they should have been able to recognize from that first ad where this was leading up to, and it was leading up to something no good.
And your city has had its first councilwoman who's a African American Muslim, so this is just having that's progress on that front, but that also scares people. It scares people to see someone like that representing, the change. So what's the reaction to her election?
So Zulfat Suera, she's a Nigerian immigrant, and she became a councilwoman at large. So she represents all of Nashville and all of Nashvillians. So, she's been a strong voice for all marginalized communities here in Nashville, and her expertise in finance has helped her through the very difficult budget process. So, people know her, and yes, somebody asked me, like, with all the progress made in Nashville, how what does this mean? Like, and I say, the more progress you make, the more the people who are against you will shout louder. And so it's still to be expected. It's to be expected. So, we're not surprised, as an organization. AMAC was founded in 2012, and in 2010, all the controversy over the building of the Murfreesboro Mosque, and they went through they went through hell in terms of, the pushback they got in the community and the discrimination and bullying of the kids. So, and then 2011, there was an anti-Sharia bill in the Tennessee State Legislature. So the Tennessee State Legislature has been testing ground for a lot of extreme bills. And we organized this Muslim community, and we brought our allies, and we pushed back, and we realized that, our mosques weren't equipped to fight Islamophobia, that you need an organization. And that's how we started the American Muslim Advisory Council. So, through the years,
yeah, you guys brought over Paul Galloway, Issa Galloway.
Yeah,
to run it.
He was the executive director for a few years. And so, there's always something going on, always something we have to react to. And I think, and I'm glad you, reached out to us to interview, because we're the ones working on the ground on these issues. We know our community. What works in New York or Chicago or Washington, D.C. does not necessarily work in Tennessee.
That's that I wanted to ask you. Should small cities and people watching this who might be living in small cities across the United States or Canada, wherever they may be, who are facing anti-Muslim bigotry, and remember, like we're beaming out to places where you might not have a large Muslim community. So should smaller cities, with smaller cities, I don't mean like the size of the actual city, but the smaller American Muslim population, smaller in their area, should they use the same tactics as cities with large populations of Muslims?
No, I think you have to be, you have to know your people, and you have to know who your enemies are. You have to know who are those, who are just being misled, and you have to work with your allies, and you have to work with your allies on the ground. When outside organizations come in and they try to take over or take the lead, they have no credibility in the community. And so that sometimes causes a larger backlash, and so in part of our strategy is always, sometimes we will publicly talk about an issue. So in the 2018 gubernatorial campaign, the candidate Bill Leaves made a comment that was disparaging against his opponent because he was visiting a Muslim restaurant. And we called him out on it. We called him out. That was something we publicly called him out, and they called me and apologized, and that was important. But then there were other incidents. There was going to be a security summit. So instead of calling them out publicly, which may have caused more backlash, which may have caused more of the Islamophobic or people who supported that security summit to come out and raise their voices, we decided, let's get our allies, let's get to reach out and put the pressure on the president of the university where this event was going to happen. So, we know the community, we know which avenues to go through, which allies to pull up and ask, but know that we're taking the lead in terms of doing it. But strategy calls for sometimes doing things in a very public-facing manner, and sometimes doing things behind the scene. Whatever works for our community, that's what we're about.
When does national or international pressure help, and when does it hurt?
I think it can hurt in terms of outside, in terms of putting pressure on the government. But Tennessee legislature is very conservative. And so, and that's sometimes the problems we have. And sometimes they see national organizations stepping in as almost like a badge of courage, or a victory for them, and they can actually raise more money for their causes because the national organization said this is about them. And so I think
can it help at sometimes? Can it help? Can national and international pressure help? Because even as the tweet was going
I think it can help, but they have to work with the people on the ground.
Exactly.
And so the strategy has to be, worked out together.
That's true. So this is something that, and this is something that I was watching on social media and following, and I can see where there's a lot of like people are calling for the entire newspaper to go, be just shut down. Some people were calling for the USA Today to fire the top editorial staff, all sorts of things that we were seeing on social media. But things have, like, what has transpired since then, and what were your asks, and how many of those have been met?
So some of these things we're still working on.
Okay.
So some of these things are still working on, but they have publicly, through the article and through calls, they've apologized. They were embarrassed by what happened. There was a sales manager who was fired, but we want to know more details because it cannot be on the shoulders of one person. So definitely we are asking for more. We were asking for a better protocol in terms of what is approved and not approved for advertising. And then we're asking that they have diversity training and training on Islamophobia. So when they're running stories, they understand. We've seen it over and over again. So many media groups and media stories that they marginalize the Muslim community. They only talk about us in terms of threats, whether we're safe or we're a threat, and so educating them on that, but also really, wanting diversity in staff. So there is not a Muslim working in their staff, and you have to look at the reporters and staff and the stakeholders in the newspaper. Are there any Muslims there? I mean, not just Muslims, diversity in general. If you're a media outlet, you need to have all perspectives on board. And it's great that they call us from their staff. So
would you want the Tennessean to be shut down tomorrow?
We have a relationship with them. They are the largest newspaper, the most widely read newspaper. Is that in our best interest to have them shut down? We get our stories out too. This is, we have to be strategic.
And their local newspapers are shutting down all across the country, and that's not good for a democracy.
No.
So that as personally from my end, I would hate to see a paper shut down, especially if their editorial staff is not blatantly Islamophobic. But we cannot deny that. Look at this, the ad, right? The ad itself, it was Islamophobically charged. The advertisement was full page. So not only and the claims were just so bizarre. But this message is not only harmful to Nashville's community, not just to Tennessee, but the country as a whole. We are in an election year. So how do you think this kind of rhetoric could influence President Trump's campaign in the coming year? Do you think this kind of sentiment could harm the direction that your city is going in?
So with or without this article, it's an election year. And you should, and ISPU, they have their data that shows that Islamophobic attacks rise during election years. And so even before this ad came out, I was warning community members, look, this is an election year, be on the lookout. And, and this was an ad, but politicians are going to say what they need and to label us a threat and bring up the national security issue. We already know Trump's track record. He's going to say whatever he's going to say against our community. So I'm more worried about the local elections, the state houses and state senate, and how they draw on this issue and how they use it, because oftentimes it's the rural counties. That's where it's happening. That's where there are hardly any Muslims living. Where are they going to get the pushback? And that's the work that we do, building these relationships with different groups to say, look, we're empowering you. When you see something hateful against our community, speak up. Say you're not going to tolerate it. So making those connections and building those friendships and alliances are very important. But just expect it. It's an election year.
So that's the messaging that a lot of people who might be in similar situations across the country expect it. Be diligent about pushing back. Don't take, so from what I'm hearing from you is don't take it lying down. Speak up, whether publicly or privately, and address that hate. So one of the things that when you were looking at just even this ad, and where the whole thing about warfare and Islam, and so what has the community in Nashville, and the fact that you all are next to, like the nexus of where Act for America, which is the largest anti-Muslim grassroots organizations in the country, who have been behind these Sharia law, anti-Sharia laws, and just extreme hate towards Muslims. You're in that. That's where you guys are located. So I would love to hear what are your plans, and what have you all been doing to educate people, get people involved in and getting more of the Muslim community civically engaged.
So our mission is to empower the Muslim community, and that comes in different ways. So first of all, we all know we have to be civically engaged. We need to be out there in the community. We need to know what the issues are, especially with the local elections, and need to be voting. And not all our community members or citizens, they can't all vote, but those who can need to be voting. And if you can't, you can still be working, be civically engaged and working on issues. I think educating our community on these issues is important. And right now with Black Lives Matter protests, that is one of the areas we're working on. Not just educating our community on racism and anti-Blackness within the community, but trying to understand racism within the educational, with education, within and the economic inequities in the community. So not just telling people to vote, but empowering them with understanding the issues, and then we work on educating the community. So whether that's educating the Muslim community in terms of their rights with law enforcement in the workplace, but also educating the non-Muslim community about who we are as Muslims. But what I think is really key, and we can do a lot of Islam 101, and that's a great starting point. But we need to educate people about Islamophobia. People don't understand it, and so
they don't understand that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, not just millions, billions.
Right.
And people are funded. That's what they run their careers on. So definitely, that is something that even our own communities don't understand.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of internalized Islamophobia in our own communities.
Right.
So
good Muslim, bad Muslim kind of dynamics.
Exactly.
Who's acceptable, who's not acceptable. That is an important conversation to have, like within the Muslim community and then outside the Muslim community. So cultural competency training and training around Islamophobia. And then it is, part of empowering the community is our relationship with media. It is getting our stories in whether it's in print or broadcast or through social media, getting our stories out there. So we control the narrative. We have to control the narrative.
So as we have a few minutes left, I know you have a meeting to follow up with all of that. So as you go, let us know what has transpired since then. So the sales manager has been fired. They have decided, the newspaper has decided to grant a gift to your organization of all the ad money that came from those ads. What else has happened?
They've also are giving us $25,000 in free ad space to use as we wish, and they're also granting $25,000 for Muslim organizations and businesses to have that free ad space. And so, that is something we want to use strategically, use it wisely, to really benefit the community, and not just the Muslim community, the broader community. Because really, empowering our community means we build alliances, that we're not just fighting for our own rights, but as Muslims, we fight for everyone's rights. We fight for justice. So I think that's an important focus. That's a focus we have to keep to. That we want to stand up for justice for all.
That's great. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your thoughts. We're following this as a case study, just to see what happens because it's hard enough to fight Islamophobia in larger metropolitan areas where there is there are more allies. To fight it on the ground in smaller Muslim communities, and just see the powerful work that is coming. That's important to highlight, and it's important for people to learn from that, because not everything is about and a lot of times for people who are working nationally, including ourselves, internationally, sometimes it's sort of you come, you focus on a case, and then you move on because there's so many more happening across this town. So it's sort of hit and run and move on. But you guys are the ones who have to deal with the aftermath and building those bonds. And it's your children on the front lines. It's your brothers and sisters on the front lines in that city. So one thing that I would say, yes, what you said is work together, strategize together, and take the lead. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Sabrina, and good luck, and keep us updated, and maybe we'll do this, and would love to have Councilwoman Zulfat on here once she's less busy and the budget passes. So that would be so. But thank you so much for the audience to be with us today. Today was a short show. We have been, this week has been super busy for Justice for All. The Uyghur Human Rights Act passed, and that was years and years of work by a lot of organizations, especially Uyghur-led organizations. We are ecstatic. We're looking forward to getting the next bill passed, which is the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, and to stop the use of enslaved labor by our Uyghur brothers and sisters. So we need you to keep an eye on that. And tomorrow we're going to have another celebratory show, actually on Wednesday, which will be on DACA. That's tomorrow, yes. On the Supreme Court ruling on DACA, which is the Dreamer Act. We'll have 2 or 3 dreamers and leadership on the show tomorrow, as well as Hassan Ahmed, who is an immigration lawyer, who will break it down for us and let us know and really explain to us what the next steps are for those in the community who are DACA recipients. Thank you so much all for joining us today. This is your host, Hena Zuberi, and make sure to keep watching us on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum.